I'm a long-time reader, first-time poster, so I don't even know if this is the right place to post this on, but it was incredibly terrifying and still gives me chills, as cliché as that sounds. I know some people say these stories are 100% true for immersion, but believe me when I say that this is 100% true. 3 of my friends and I were spending the night together on New Year's Eve about a year ago, and we decided we wanted to spend the night in a tent outside really close to the woods. We were laughing and fucking around, normal teenage things. Then we heard this rustling outside in the leaves. Figuring it was just an animal or something, we shrugged it off. At this point, it was nearing midnight and we had a flashlight on in the tent and we were blasting music. That's when all hell broke loose. We heard this chirping noise outside. When I say chirping, I don't mean it was like a bird or a raccoon, but this unearthly chirping that didn't sound like any animal at all. In fear we were about to be ambushed, I demanded my friends temporarily turn off the lights and the music. At first they looked at me like I was crazy, but I strengthened my tone. Turn it all off. Now. At this point, they knew I was serious. So they turned it all off and listened. There it was again, this unearthly chirping that didn't sound like anything. My friends and I were shitting bricks, but I was a little bit braver than the rest of them. I had been taking karate for about 4 years, and I'm a very tall female capable of taking down a grown man. So I figured I could take whatever was out there, or at least I could carry one of my friends if we had to run away. They all tried to play it cool and said it must have been one of those screamer firework things, but I could tell they were all shitting themselves. We carried on screwing around for a few more minutes, desperately trying to forget about the screech chirping thing outside. Then we heard it again, this time much closer to our tent. This was the first time I could properly hear it. When it made a clearer sound, reality drop kicked me in the stomach. It was fucking big, and it was almost right outside our tent. My friends and I were about to shit ourselves, so they start asking me questions as to what I thought it was. I was the friend who was into all things paranormal, and I still am, but I've never been a paranoid person. So they asked me. I told them, just as a suggestion, that it could be a skinwalker or a flesh gate, because I read somewhere that they mock the voices of your friends of emit noises that they think will lure out their victims. I only said this because I thought that could explain the scream chirp, but I think they were really scared. We heard it again. At this point, everyone was shitting bricks, and one of them eventually called her older brother to come and hang out with us for a while. While he was there, just our luck, we couldn't hear the chirp screech anymore. Damn. We hung out with him for a while until we all decided to go on a walk with. The walk was fun, and my friends were terrified because we were walking around in the dark, but I've always liked the dark, as it was so vast and mysterious. I was also hoping we would find the flesh gate, so my friends would stop acting like stuck-up little shits that weren't scared, because I could see they were shitting themselves. Part of me was also terrified to see what would happen if we stumbled across a flesh gate, but her older brother had a knife with him, and I was prepared to stab it if he wasn't. Fast forward later into the night. We were blasting music again and playing with a multicolored strobe light. Probably not the best way to avoid being jumped in the night now that I think about it. My friend's brother had left us his knife in case we heard anything else that night. My friends all decided that I was the only one who would be brave enough to actually stab someone or something if it came to it, so I was in charge of holding the 6-inch knife all night. Thankfully, it was in a sheath because despite my training, I'm quite clumsy, especially this late into the night. I couldn't help myself taking the knife out of the sheath because it was so interesting and beautiful looking. There it was again, the same fucking chirp screech. I unzipped the tent to look, knife drawn, and heard something scurry away quickly into the woods. Since my friends didn't hear it, I left it alone. Everything was fine for the rest of the night, that is, until I was the only one awake. I heard this horrible scream howl, much more blood-curdling than the chirps. It kept getting closer to the tent and then backing away, like it somehow knew I was the only one awake. It circled us, made itself sound distant, then come back with another howl. One of my friends briefly awoke and told me it was probably someone having a party, but I could tell she was just saying that so she could get the sleep she desperately needed. Me, however, I could go for 3 days straight without having to sleep once. I was perfectly fine without sleep, unless I had a long day of school the next day or something. Believe me when I say I didn't let my guard down once. I listened to this thing and the location the cries took place. I wasn't about to let some fucking fleshgate or some shit come and kill my friends and I on a night that was supposed to be fun. I drew the knife a few times and practiced slashing the air in case it attacked, but it never did. The fucker just spent hours taunting me, trying to draw me out. I was incredibly tempted to run out there just to get a look at it, but I knew that was exactly what it wanted. Waiting for me not to be in a group so it could pick the threat off, then my friends. There was no way in hell I would let it anywhere near my friends. The older brother had left to go to a friend's house later that night as well, and the friend we were all staying with lived with her grandma, no strong men. I lived around the neighborhood, and both my mom and my dad were home. My dad is a big guy, standing at 6'2" and strong as hell, but it would be too far to run. I couldn't go out there to see what it was, even if I wanted to. Even though I'm pretty damn fast, I was weak considering how late it was and I would become this thing's prey. Knowing this, I just laid back, knife at the ready, listening in absolute horror. You don't know what true vulnerability is until you're on the outskirts of the woods in a tent with 3 lives in your hands, while some paranormal creature is hunting you, teasing you, and you only have a close combat weapon that you're not even certain would put a scratch on it. I sat there in silence until around 6 in the morning when I was certain it had stopped. I couldn't take it anymore. The damn thing had driven me insane. My work there was done, as I was certain it was gone. I left the knife on my pillow and a note that said I went home and I wasn't dead, so I could reassure my friends when they woke up later on. I began to walk home to my house with the streets poorly illuminated by street lamps. There weren't that many, leaving a fuckton of dark spaces that I couldn't see even if I tried. To make matters 10 times worse, my glasses were smudged and I could barely see a fucking thing out of them. I knew it was better to my advantage if I kept them on though, because I'm blind as a bat. I scanned my surrounding my whole way there, keeping my eyes on every direction this thing could attack me from. The fucker was probably just waiting to get me alone, but I wasn't going to let it do anything to me. When I finally got to my house, the door was unlocked to my relief, so I could get in without my parents hearing me. Unfortunately, this was 5 in the morning, and as I mentioned before, clumsy as ever, so I bumped into everything as I tried to navigate myself to my room, where I forced myself to go to sleep. After that, when asked, my friends would say it was a screamer firework or some animal, but I can tell they were scared and just trying to make sense of it all. I tried to make sense of it too, but I just couldn't. I knew what I heard, and it was much worse than they could have imagined. They probably thought I mentioned flesh gates and skinwalkers just to scare them, but I truly believe it was one of the two. Nothing like this has ever happened again, but there's a reason we haven't been sleeping outside in a while. Post too long, I'll sum it up. Friends and I camping outside the woods and were being hunted by a flesh gate. There. Don't get me wrong, I still love the dark, but this turned us all away from it for a bit. Feel free to send me any questions or comments and I'll update if I ever have a similar experience, or Mr. Fleshgate has come back for a round 2. I may share some of my other scary paranormal experiences in the future, but until then, please be careful while camping anywhere. You never know what can be lurking around in the dark. This happened on New Year's Eve of 2021 when I was 17 on a now deleted app called It's Me. It was an app where you could talk to people all around the world without the fear of showing your face as you created your own animated avatar. Looking back, the app was a really enjoyable experience as I met people I'm still friends with today. But most people who used It's Me could agree that it could get toxic. Many users, including myself, trolled parties which were basically live streams where a host could allow 3 other people to be talking with them, and the party's guests could comment in the chat. One time I was trolling a party when I was new to the app, and the host was, unbeknownst to me, quite notorious on the app and already had a large following. Before this, I'd never heard of the host, although I knew a couple of her friends. Her name was Kaylani, and mine was Selenas, not my real name. Usually, the people I trolled didn't have the reaction I wanted, i.e., arguing back, but this host starting arguing back, and we went back and forth for a while, with the party getting many guests and the comments were going wild. After the party, I texted her on the app, going back and forth with her again until we were full-on beefing, and I asked her to pull up. Really, I didn't want to fight this girl because I was only arguing with her in the first place, for shits and giggles, but she was taking me serious. She told me she lives in Chicago and I live in Milwaukee, so I thought there's no point in driving 1.5 hours just to fight a girl that I've never even met. At the time, I was stupid and still had the mindset of a hood rat, so me pulling up to this girl wasn't far-fetched. It got to the point where this bitch wouldn't shut up, so I did something I still regret to this day. I told her I'd meet her at her place if she was with it, and she accepted. I hopped in my car and put her address in the GPS. Not gonna lie, the apartment building she lived in looked sketchy and ghetto, but I didn't really care because I also was from the hood. I brought my twin sister with me, just in case Kaylani had people with her to jump me. As we pulled up, I saw a girl who looked to be Hispanic and had sneakers and a hoodie on, so I presumed it was her because of her accent and her clothes. I told my sister to wait in the car because she looked to be alone. I ran up to her and we started fighting. Not to brag or anything, but I've been in many fights growing up in the hood, so I do know how to defend myself properly. To be honest, I was getting the best of her, when out of nowhere, some guy proceeds to pick me up and try and separate us. At first, I thought it was some kind of security of the apartment building, but he wasn't wearing any kind of uniform or anything. Actually, he looked quite a mess looking back, and he reeked of alcohol too. He managed to somehow separate us, even though at this point I was going batshit crazy, and Kaylani was still trying to get little hits in. By this time, my sister came out of the car when she saw the guy getting involved, and presumably Kaylani's friends who came from inside the building, trying to hold her back. After we were separated, the guy literally starts dragging me to a rusty, beat-up black Honda that was parked nearby. I started fearing for my life and screamed my sister's name. She came sprinting, but the guy had already opened the trunk and threw me in, trying to shut the trunk. I was kicking and screaming, but he was really strong and managed to shut the trunk. My heart practically stopped when I felt the car speed off. I can still remember my sister's screams for help. We drove for 5 minutes, and I'm claustrophobic, so I was frantically trying to get out the tiny trunk. I was texting my sis, and luckily she informed me she had called the police already, and she was following the car. After a few minutes, the car stopped, and he lifted the trunk and dragged me by my hair into some house that looked rundown and dirty from the outside. He practically threw me into the house, and I saw my sister running after the guy with a baseball bat we brought, just in case anything bad was to happen. She managed to get one good hit on the man with the bat, but he kicked her off and locked the door. Even though I heard sirens nearby, I was still terrified of what he was going to do to me. He dragged me into some room in the back of the house, and the whole time I was fighting him off as best I could. The police burst in a couple seconds later, however, and tackled the man. Surprisingly, he didn't resist and was quite calm, letting them handcuff him. I was reunited with my sister, and in that moment I realized how precious life can truly be. Ever since that day, I changed for the better. Me and my sister no longer beef with anyone, and we've definitely grew up in the past year. After the incident, Kaylani left the app. I decided to call it Quits Me. Soon after as well, because many people I was cool with starting moving on, and I wanted to leave the memory of that day behind. I never told anyone online. It's me what happened, not even my friends, as I was afraid no one would believe me. So if there's anything to take away from this story, it's to not make dangerous decisions like I did that day, pulling up to a sketchy neighborhood to fight a stranger. The It's Me app was shut down on August 10th of this year and was replaced with a new app, Codename. Recently, I moved back to England with my sister, and we both go to an amazing college here. I hope y'all stay safe and have a Merry Christmas and an even better New Year. Never sleep on New Year's Eve. It's something that my mother always told me. And well, I believed her for the longest time because, well, she's my mother. I always assumed that it was because she wanted me to be the runner at her little New Year's party. She would invite her friends over, and they would drink and play cards. I would be forced to fill glasses and refill the cheese and crackers. Then when the clock struck midnight, everyone would leave, and I would be rushed off to bed. I'm older now, moved in with some friends, and got a new job. This new job had been working me crap hours. I had to cover for all people who quit or didn't bother showing up. That meant overtime on overtime. I, being naive, easily accepted it, even though it was killing me slowly. So when I finally got off early on New Year's Eve, I thought that I would try and party a bit. My friends and I cracked a few beers and sat in the living room while the TV was turned to the Times Square countdown. I felt my eyes get heavy, but I tried to bear through it. But by the time 10 p.m. rolled around, it was time for me to tap out. I stood up and announced that I was going to bed, and went upstairs. I seemed to fall asleep fairly quickly and was teased with a wonderful dream. When I woke up, the house was silent and the sun was shining bright. I went downstairs and grabbed something from the fridge just to see that the living room was a hot mess. I shouted out to my roommate Lauren, but I got no response. I called out again, nothing. She's usually up by now since it was nearing 12 in the afternoon. I went upstairs to Lauren's room, but she wasn't there. I called out to my other roommate Nikki, but no response from her either. When I checked her room, she was also gone. Maybe they went somewhere together? I ran outside and to see if their cars were gone, but they were still there. I assumed that they didn't go for a walk, considering the fact that it was the dead middle of winter, where temperatures were reaching nearly -10. While I was outside, I noticed something. There were no cars going by. Now I live on a fairly busy street, so I found this weird. I peeked down a bit further, but there were no cars in sight. Now this may sound weird, but I peeked into my neighbors' houses, but there was no sight of them. All their cars were still in their driveways. I began getting paranoid at this point, so I sprinted back inside. I turned on my radio, one of my Christmas gifts, to the morning talk stations. I was met by radio silence. By then, I really started panicking. I grabbed my keys and drove out in my car. I drove for miles on miles, but there were no people. Restaurants, grocery stores, even in the city, there was nobody. Just silence. I finally checked my phone. The calls wouldn't ring, text wouldn't send, and most of all, the date read January 1st, 2021. I came to the conclusion that I was trapped alone in the same year, like the year had repeated itself. At first, being alone was scary. Then, it was kind of fun. I would go around exploring buildings I had never been in, sleep in 5-star hotels, walk into celebrities' mansions, and take anything I wanted from stores. But by month 3, all the non-processed food had gone bad, since there was nobody working at the stores. By month 5, the grocery stores began smelling so rancid that I had to wear a mask to enter. I've been living on canned vegetables and frozen food that I'm starting to get sick of it. I would kill to sit down and be able to eat at a restaurant again. By month 7, I began feeling so lonely. I missed everyone I ever knew, and I began going crazy. I would talk to this stuffed dog I named Brian, and we came up with a plan. We would travel to all 50 states and take a picture at all the iconic sites. By month 9, I had already completed it, and I felt this immense feeling of emptiness. I had done everything. I wondered what was going on around the world. Was there anyone trapped like me? I couldn't check, since, well, I couldn't fly a plane. By month 11, I had gone so insane that I thought that maybe if I just ended it all that I would be released from this hell. But then I paused and thought for a moment. If there was a way to get in, then there is a way to get out. After much thinking, I came to the conclusion that I had to make it to New Year's again. But then I saw them. There were these creatures. They stood over 9 foot and spoke in this deranged English kind of tongue. They were looking for someone, me. I got the sense that I should run, so I did. It's December 21st, 2021 right now, and I'm hiding out in California. Though I can't stay for long. Those things have been following my tracks and they're quickly catching up. I'm afraid that I won't make it to the end of the year, to 2023. In case I don't, heed my warning, as my mother warned me, never sleep on New Year's Eve. When I was around 12, I spent New Year's Eve at my friend's house, whilst our parents went out to a restaurant in a nearby town. The house was old and pretty isolated, and to be honest, scared the crap out of me. You had to drive up a long, overgrown track to reach it. A lot of my other friends at school would say the house was haunted, and it was actually featured in a ghost book, if I remember rightly. So anyways, we were sat downstairs in the lounge watching some TV and heard the loudest crashing sound. I still remember the look in my friend's eyes when we turned to each other in shock. It took us a while to get up and actually go and investigate what the sound was. We crept out of the lounge, down the hallway to the rest of the house. The crashing sounded like it came from upstairs, so we headed up to check it out. When we got to the top of the stairs, there was a breeze coming from somewhere. It was cold, like ice cold. We moved down the hallway upstairs towards the wind and turned to go down another corridor. Bear in mind, this house was massive. Honestly, it was near enough a mansion from the early 1920s. At the end of the corridor was his mom and dad's bedroom. The door was moving back and forward slowly. We both stopped and just stood still, frozen, not saying a word to each other. After a moment, my friend walked towards the door. I was still frozen in fear and fell behind a little. As he pushed the door open and snuck into the room, the darkness consumed him. I could barely make out his silhouette. There was perfect silence for a couple of seconds before I heard him let out the most terrifying scream. My adrenaline kicked in, and I ran towards the room to see what had happened. I searched for the light and turned it on. He was stood, frozen stiff and pale, just staring into an empty corner of the room. Just to the side of him was a massive antique mirror that was smashed into pieces and scattered all over the floor. I placed my arm on his shoulder and asked him if he was okay. She broke the mirror. I asked him who broke it. He said the woman in the corner. She told me. At that point, I was honestly like this, and told him we should leave. He turned to leave with me. Just before we did, I wanted to check the mirror. Surely the wire had broken or something, I thought to myself. I bent down to the mirror and turned it over. The string that was holding it to the wall was intact. It hadn't snapped. I looked at the wall. The nail was still firmly fixed in the wall. At that point, I was so terrified, I told him to ring his parents and tell them to come home. We waited outside the front door until our parents arrived back from the restaurant. My dad and his went straight up to the bedroom to check it out when they arrived and saw the broken mirror. They sort of pushed it off and said we were up to no good and playing a game that got out of hand. After that night, my friend never really spoke about it to me. The worst part, recently, I'm 24 now, I was having a general chat with my mom, and as New Year is coming up, that night came up, I told her about it, and she said, I believe you. Your mom told me a few days after that night that she had seen a woman in her room telling her to leave the house. It honestly sent my whole body tingling, and I had flashbacks to that night, although it's coming up to almost 12 years ago now. I didn't have much planned on New Year's Eve. My friend Aaron was having a family party, so he invited me and 2 other friends to join in. Me, Aaron, Nat, and Anthony were chilling in his basement. Around 9:30, Aaron got a text from a number he didn't recognize. It said, "Yo, I'm outside." So he went outside to check and found that no one was there. He came down and asked if we had that number in our phones, and none of us did. A little while later, Nat got a text from the same number. It said, "Yo, I'm outside." She replied, "Where are you?" and then got a text back saying, "Turn around." We were all in the basement together, and clearly no one was behind her. so we figured that someone was trying to prank us. Around 10:45, I got the text, "Yo, I'm outside." Same number. Now I was really curious and wanted to figure out who this person was. I texted back, "All right, I'm coming out." I promptly got a text back saying, "I'm already inside." Fast forward to around 12:10. We were upstairs with everyone else watching the NBC New Year's show. I decided to text this person, "Happy New Year. Love you XOXO." I did this just to get some sort of reaction, hoping they'd reveal themselves. But I got no reply until around 1 when I was sitting on my friend's couch playing games on my phone. It said, "I'm waiting by your car." I didn't think too much of it. I just texted back, "What's my license plate number?" It took a few minutes to get a reply which said, "You drive a Honda, right?" Big deal. Lots of people drive Hondas. Around 1:30, I was putting on my shoes to leave and got another text. "I'm ready to leave now. Are you?" Now, I can't lie, that was a timely text, so I got a little rattled. But I put on my shoes and went out the door. I had to drop off Anthony and Nat. So we walked to my car, and before going in, I checked the back seats and the surrounding area. Nothing in sight. We got in the car. Here's where things got creepy. I could have made a 3-point turn and driven out the way I came in, but I was too lazy to reverse. I drove straight, thinking that I knew the area well enough to make the proper turns to get out. I ended up making a right turn prematurely and quickly realized I made the wrong turn. My phone vibrated in my jacket pocket, and I got a text. "You're going the wrong way." I was shook. I stopped on the side of the road. I wasn't lost or anything. I'm in the suburbs after all. I just made the wrong turn. I stayed put until a couple of cars passed me. I turned to the back seat and asked if Nat or Anthony were playing around, and they said they had no idea what was going on. So I tried to put that behind me and continued driving. We came to a stop sign where we had to make a turn onto the main road. Anthony's house was on the left. I decided to turn right. As I was driving, Anthony said, "What the hell are you doing?" I told him I just wanted to see what happened. I drove about a kilometer up and turned into an empty parking lot in a plaza. I did a big circle and then came out the way I came in. I was a little relieved at this point, so I pulled out and headed towards Anthony's house, and then my pocket vibrated again. Stop with the detours. I'm still here. I was shook. I turned off my phone and left it at that. I didn't drive all the way home. I asked if I could chill at Anthony's for a bit, but ended up sleeping over. What creeped me out was the timeliness of all the texts. But what sealed the deal was the punctuation and grammar. I know that sounds silly, but friends don't really text like that. Edit, just adding that my other friends who were out and about on NYE didn't get any messages. So whoever this person is knew that me, Nat, Anthony, and Aaron were all together. It too. I got the S3 when it came out and didn't want to carry that number over. But up until then, I had the number on my phone for show and tell. I hated scrolling through my convos and seeing that number. People who I've told the story to have always tried to call the number, but they get a message saying that the number doesn't exist. I haven't dived too deep into this. On one hand, I felt that something really bad could happen if I kept probing it, and nothing has happened so far. But on the other hand, I don't have any closure, and sometimes I get paranoid about getting another message. Thank you for watching or listening. If you enjoyed stories, please subscribe.